Hi, my name is Elizabeth Lee, and for my digital short today, I'm going to be talking about gender inequality. Gender inequality is a universal issue that affects societies throughout all cultures and time periods. Although significant progress has been made in a number of cultures, gender inequality is still a prevalent issue within many societies today. In Island of a Thousand Mirrors, a woman's main purpose in life was simply to become a wife. Island of a Thousand Mirrors by Naomi Munawira takes place in Sri Lanka during the time of the Sri Lankan Civil War. Due to the patriarchal nature of their society, many young women were being put under the impression that their main goal in life was to find a husband. Women were restricted by the stigma that they could only become a housewife. This stigma limited a woman's role as they were not viewed as anything other than a man's wife. This image was taken directly off of a Sri Lankan news article called The Sunday Morning: What is the Patriarchy? This article was written in August of last year, and the author writes about how women are oftentimes ignored in their culture as their primary role is seen as being a housewife. The author writes about how patriarchy literally means the rule of the father, and how women in Sri Lanka are still being held to these outdated standards that were created by a patriarchal society. This shows that women in Sri Lanka are growing tired of these outdated views and are trying to prove to their own country that they can take on more than just household roles. The main character of the novel, Yasodhara Raja Singh, narrates the story of her father and his twin sister's birth. It is clear through this passage that gender inequality also affects people despite their young age. Her father was born with pale skin, while her aunt was born with a darker complexion. In Sri Lankan culture, darker skin was seen as low caste origins. Upon seeing her tanner granddaughter, the narrator's great grandmother exclaims, "If only it had been the boy who was so dark, this black girl will never get her married." This not only portrays the colorist ideals within Sri Lanka, but it also shows how important it was for women to get married in their culture. This indicates that in Sri Lankan culture, as well as many other cultures in the world, a woman's primary purpose in life was to get married, while that was not as important of a factor for men. The common belief in Sri Lanka during this time was that a woman's role in society was to become a wife. Although being a housewife is a difficult job and there are many tasks required of it, women were being devalued as they were only seen as being a man's wife and nothing more. In Island of a Thousand Mirrors, much of a woman's value was placed solely on her physical appearance. As portrayed in the book, after being examined by her mother, Visakha is viewed as more valuable, because she is considered to be conventionally attractive within her culture. In the book, it states, "Only one thing of value remains. Sylvia Sinatra has started to notice the love-struck boys who cycle up and down the lane, hoping for a glimpse of her youngest daughter. She has noticed the scouring eyes of male cousins, the dresses that need to be let out at the bust and hips, cinched at the waist. She has made measurements and calculations." The plain fact that Visakha was referred to as a thing of value simply because of her conventional beauty shows how women were primarily valued only for their appearances. This is just an image of Maureen Hinger. She was a Sri Lankan dancer, actress, and Miss Universe contestant. Hinger is oftentimes viewed as one of the most beautiful and valuable Sri Lankan women. Maureen Hinger represents the ideal beauty standards in Sri Lanka. This image comes directly from a Sri Lankan plastic surgeon's website. This website is advertising cosmetic surgery for women in order to help them achieve the Sri Lankan beauty standard of having an hourglass figure. Getting plastic surgery is not a bad thing. However, the description of the ad is extremely concerning as it is essentially telling women that their value is based within their beauty. The ad states, "If you are a chubby woman, then you must want to get a lean body, and if you have a lean body, then you must want the perfect curves." It's rightly said, a woman can never be happy with her body, but this surgical procedure can give you an exhilarating thrill and make you satisfied with your body as well. This ad is basically telling women that if they do not have the ideal body type, then they should not be happy with themselves. This is an extremely toxic ad as it can easily hurt a woman's self-esteem and make them feel less valuable for not having a specific body type. This kind of culture can be extremely toxic for women, and instead, society should be promoting all different body types rather than making women feel less valuable for being different. In this image, it is clear that the woman in the orange skirt is jealous of the woman in the black dress. The woman in the black dress is being portrayed as more attractive, so she's being viewed as more valuable. In Ceylon today, a news website in Sri Lanka, Vanessa Anthony published the story Toxic Beauty Standards. In this article, ideal beauty is defined as a socially constructed notion that physical attractiveness is one of women's most important assets, and something all women should strive to achieve and maintain. Feminists all over the world fight against objectification, but in many parts of Asia, including in Sri Lanka, there is an urgent need for change as some women face unrealistic beauty standards. In Island of a Thousand Mirrors, women were being deprived of an education and instead were being forced to get married. In the book, Sylvia Sinatra forces her daughter to discontinue her studying so she can focus her time on finding a man, as that was viewed as far more important. However, her daughter strongly opposes her mother's old-fashioned views, and when trying to convince her mother to allow her to continue her education, Visakha cries, "But Mom, what about university?" To which Sylvia Sinether purrs, "No, my darling, there is nothing to be gained from bending over books all the time, except a hunch as big as Alice's. We must start looking for a nice boy." Despite desperately wishing to continue her education at a university, Visakha is told that finding a nice boy to marry is of higher importance. This photo taken by the World Bank clearly shows that the majority of students within the school systems in Sri Lanka are male. In the article titled "Pulled Out of School, Pushed into Marriage," it states that worldwide an estimated 12 million girls are married every year before the age of 18. Many girls won't return to school because they will be kept at home for caregiving, domestic work, farm grazing, and marriage. In Visakha's case, her family likely had the funds to send her to school. However, due to her mother's outdated views, she decided to keep her from going to university and instead pursue a family. However, in many other cases, families did not have enough money or resources to send all their kids to school, so oftentimes they would send only their sons to school and keep their daughters at home. They did this because they believed that it was vital for males to get an education, but not for women, because they believed that it was more important for women to be getting married rather than getting an education. In comparison to many other South Asian countries, Sri Lanka has actually been extremely successful in providing both genders access to education. However, there's still much improvement to be made. In the Borgen Project for Girls' Education in Sri Lanka, they state that while girls in the nation have access to the same education as boys and tend to do better than them in school, the statistics for adults do not quite mirror these trends. Women's adult literacy is lower than that of the men, and the unemployment rate for women is 2 times higher than the rate for men. This shows that although women have been given the same access to education, that education is not translating into equal employment later on in life. Whether it be because employers are simply not hiring women or women are simply not entering the workforce due to their culturally defined familial responsibilities. In Island of a Thousand Mirrors, many believed that women were incapable of surviving independently. It was repeatedly expressed throughout the book that a woman needs a man in her life to care for her. Sylvia Sinatra is under the impression that Visakha will not be able to provide for herself in the future since Visakha's father passed away. Sylvia tells her daughter, "You're a big girl now. We have to start talking about what will happen to you. This studying business was fine when your father was alive, but now what good can it do? We must start looking for a boy who can take care of you." Since Visakha has no significant male figure in her life, her mother believes that the most important thing for her to do is to find a man to marry because she will not be able to take care of herself in the future. In the article titled "Sri Lanka: Whether Widows, Single Women, and Single Mothers Are Vulnerable to Violence or Any Other Ill Treatment in Colombo," they state that discrimination and social stigma are common towards female-headed households, which are deemed to be inauspicious and are not culturally accepted. Female heads of households are viewed as being unlucky and a bad omen. This image is of a group of women in Sri Lanka who refer to themselves as the economic empowerment of single women in Thurukaville. It is clear through groups like these that the idea of a woman living without a man is extremely taboo in Sri Lanka. However, women like them are attempting to foster change and empower single women to not be ashamed of being independent. Women were viewed as weak and in need of a man in order to live a comfortable life. This was likely due to the fact that women were financially dependent on men. However, women were never given the opportunity to be financially independent because of their lack of education and social status. As proven by the economic empowerment of single women in Thurukaville, that is simply not true, as women can still lead successful lives independently if given the opportunity. In Island of a Thousand Mirrors, rape victims were highly stigmatized and were shunned by society. In Island of a Thousand Mirrors, rape victims were highly stigmatized and were shunned by society. Due to the high amounts of rape and sexual assault against women in Sri Lanka, there have been many anti-rape protests, like the one shown in this image. In the book, when Saraswati was young, she was not aware of what being spoiled truly meant. However, she understood that if you're a girl, there is always the chance that the soldiers will spoil you, or the people will say that they did. I don't know what spoiled means exactly, but it must be something truly terrible. It happened to my friend Parvati. People stopped talking to her as soon as it happened, but they never stopped talking about her. After Saraswati was raped, she realized what being spoiled truly meant. Her own father refused to look at her, and she was shunned and looked down upon in her society. Saraswati then went on to join the Tigers as a way to sort of cleanse her name, so she would not be known as the girl who was raped, but rather she would be known as a dangerous Tamil soldier. Although Saraswati's story is technically fictional, this kind of story is not uncommon for women living in Sri Lanka during the time of the Sri Lankan Civil War. In a study done at Bemidji State University by Jessica Santala, they were trying to find the differences in motivations between men and women suicide bombers. They had interviewed various Liberation Tigers of Tamil Alam members and during the interviewing of 14 LTTE members, 7 cited rape as a reason for other women they know to have joined, while 4 mentioned it as a personal reason. It is clear that a common motivation for female suicide bombers is to feel empowered after having so much taken away from them. This is a photograph of Thanmasi Rajaratnam, a female suicide bomber for the Tamil Tigers and one of the first female suicide bombers. Although no one is certain what her motivation could be for choosing to become a suicide bomber, it is speculated that she could have been personally victimized by the war. In Sri Lankan culture, if a woman were to be raped, then she would be deemed as unfit for marriage. This is because in Sri Lankan culture they believe that women must not have sex until marriage. Sri Lanka also has an extremely high rate of rapes in their country. However, marital rape in Sri Lanka is actually not illegal. This is an image of the previous Sri Lankan president suggesting that rapists should marry their victims. So, in order to reduce the number of rapes in their country, the former Sri Lankan president, Mahinda Rajapaksa, suggested that rapists should marry their victims. He claims that they are also suggesting this for the women in order to help them get justice, since no one would want to marry them after being raped, so the victim's rapist would be forced to marry them. Despite being a victim of rape, these women were basically being completely ignored and mistreated by their own people, and rather than giving these women the help they needed, they were basically pushed out of society. In Island of a Thousand Mirrors, women were pitied and looked down upon if they did not conceive a child while married. In the book, despite trying for many years, Mala was unable to conceive a child, so instead she spent her days crossbreeding flowers. However, in the book it states, across town, Anuradha's mother, a lady we take pains to rarely encounter, smites her forehead. All this nonsense. Praj smiles. What is the point of making plants grow when nothing is growing inside of her? Anuradha's mother simply diminished all of Mala's other achievements and instead only focused on the fact that Mala was not a mother. In Sri Lankan culture, women were treated as if their sole purpose in life was to create babies and take care of them. In the cultural atlas, they state that in Sri Lanka, the general trend is for men to focus on income opportunities while women focus on the domestic sphere. People are extremely quick to judge childless women simply because they are under the belief that a woman's life is incomplete without a child. They also believe that a woman is simply not doing enough and is being lazy if she is not raising a child. Family is an extremely important aspect of Sri Lankan culture and it is valued very highly. In this culture, they strongly believe that a woman's role in life was to first become a wife, then to become a mother. It is perfectly acceptable for women to be married and not have children, and it should be no one's decision but their own. However, in Sri Lankan culture, it can be looked down upon as having a family is seen as an extremely important milestone in one's life. However, in Mala's case, she had desperately wanted a child, but she was simply unable to conceive for a period of time. Yet she still received lots of unwarranted advice and attention from other people as they were pressuring her to have a child. These people acted as if Mala's sole purpose in life was to have a child, as they disregarded her other interests and accomplishments. In Aeschylus or Oresteia, Clytemnestra is punished for her crimes more severely because she is a woman. Despite the fact that Clytemnestra, Orestes, and Agamemnon all committed the same crime, Clytemnestra was the only one who was held thoroughly accountable for her crime. Through these 3 paintings, it is clear that all 3 characters had murdered one of their family members, yet Agamemnon and Orestes, both men, were not charged for their heinous crimes. The reason Clytemnestra was looked down upon so heavily for her crimes was likely because during this time women were seen as subordinates to their husband, so killing her husband was seen as extremely offensive. Clytemnestra's crime was seen as unforgivable, while Orestes and Agamemnon's crimes were seen as justified, likely because they were men. During this time period, this culture was extremely patriarchal. Men were meant to be stronger according to society's standards. Men were also seen as more powerful than women, so it is unsurprising that this kind of society would choose not to punish the man, but instead just punish the woman. Additionally, Agamemnon and Orestes had both killed women while they were men, while Clytemnestra killed a man when she was a woman. And since during this time men were seen as having a higher value than women, that made Clytemnestra's crime more heinous. All 3 of these family members had committed the same crime, and all of them come from the same social status. However, only Clytemnestra was seen as guilty. As I said before, the main reason Clytemnestra was the only one seen as a true criminal was because she was a woman. It was also likely because people during this time period were not used to seeing a woman in power. Upon seeing Clytemnestra, who's a very strong woman, that decided to get revenge against her husband, people were frightened of her strong personality traits. Clytemnestra displayed typically masculine personality traits in comparison with other women during this time period, so people were likely already rooting against her. In Aeschylus or Oresteia, a man cheating on his wife was seen as a societal norm, while a woman cheating on her husband was seen as extremely scandalous. Although in modern times cheating on your significant other would still be considered distasteful, in Aeschylus or Oresteia, if a man were to cheat on his significant other, he would be admired, but if a woman were to cheat on her significant other, she would be heavily shamed. Agamemnon was even viewed as more masculine for having brought home a mistress, as he had taken this mistress as a prize for his victories in the war. Agamemnon proudly states when presenting his new mistress, "I brought this girl with me, my gift from the army, the choicest flower, the pick of the prizes." However, when the chorus discovers that Clytemnestra had been lovers with Aegisthus during the entirety of the war, they harshly criticize her actions and they state, "Woman, you skulked at home while the other men went to war. All the time you were fouling this man's bed." The way that the people reacted when finding out that Agamemnon and Clytemnestra were both cheating shows the clear differences in the societal norms on men cheating versus women cheating. The two images are paintings depicting both Agamemnon and Clytemnestra's mistresses. The way the two mistresses are portrayed shows how different the standards were for men and women. The first image is of Agamemnon's mistress Cassandra, and the second image is of Clytemnestra's lover Aegisthus. You can clearly see through these two different images how differently the two are being portrayed. Cassandra is being portrayed as beautiful and goddess-like, while Aegisthus is being portrayed as sneaky and underhanded. They are clearly putting Cassandra on a pedestal and view her very highly, while Aegisthus is being viewed as a homewrecker. This again goes to show how normalized it was for men to have mistresses during this time period, while the same did not apply to women. This belief is extremely unfair to women as they are not being given the same set of standards as men. In the Decameron, a woman's life was essentially controlled by men. This group of women in the image simply wanted to evacuate Venice in search of the countryside in order to avoid the despairs of the Black Death that was ravaging their city at the time. However, going out without a man's accompaniment is viewed as improper, so before leaving, the women sought men to accompany them as it was seen as unfitting for women to travel without a man by their side. Alyssa even states that it is certainly true that man is ahead of a woman, and without a man to guide us, only rarely does anything we do accord us praise. Even the women during this time had deemed themselves unfit to embark on their journey without a man to guide them. Women are oftentimes treated as objects and are sometimes even given little to no say in their life choices. In a short story told in the Decameron, Madonna Caterina was given little to no say in where she would live after awakening from her coma. After waking up from her unconscious state, Madonna Caterina begs Messer Gentile to let her return back to her husband and family. Out of love for her, Messer Gentile reluctantly agrees under the condition that he may present her to her husband in a ceremony in which he sees fit. She agrees. At this ceremony, Messer Gentile states, "This lady ought to belong to me, and no one has a right to ask for her back." Messer Gentile is under the impression that since he found Madonna Caterina, he had rightful ownership over her. What is more shocking is that the other men at the ceremony unanimously agree with his conclusion. Women were not given any choice in decisions that regard themselves. Instead, they are treated as objects that could be owned and traded at any man's will. Amanda Cloud writes in her article Gender Roles of Women in the Renaissance that celibacy became the female norm, and the relations of the sexes were restructured to one of female dependency and male domination. Women lived the life of the underlying sex, men ruled over everything. Since birth, women were given little to no control in their lives. First they were ruled over by their family, then they were to be ruled over by their husbands. As shown in the two examples from the Decameron, it is clear that during this time period women were answered to either their husbands or any male figure in her life, as their roles were simply to just take care of the household. In the Decameron, sexual assault against women was extremely normalized. In the fourth story told in the Decameron by Loretta, a woman gets sexually assaulted. However, the assailant was not convicted nor was he even confronted for his crimes. Upon hearing the news of Madonna Caterina's supposed death, Messer Gentile immediately goes to her tomb and says to himself, "Well then, Madonna Caterina, you are dead. While you lived, I never had a single glance from you, and so now that you can't defend yourself, I shall certainly take a kiss from you, dead as you are. Why should I not just touch her breast now that I am here? I shall never be able to touch it again, and I never did in the past." After molesting Madonna Caterina, Messer Gentile realized that she was actually not dead, but was simply unconscious, so Messer Gentile removed her from her tomb and nursed her back to health. Messer Gentile had told the story to numerous people, yet no one acknowledged his crime against the woman, and he faced no repercussions for his actions. Even though Messer Gentile was under the belief that Madonna Caterina was dead when he touched her, it was still a violation of Madonna Caterina's body, especially since she was unconscious and unable to protect herself. Messer Gentile was not convicted or even scolded for his crime against Madonna Caterina, despite the fact that many people, including her own husband, were aware of the crime that had taken place. In the Decameron Web published by Brown University, they state that during these times, rarely did the courts punish rapists or those who committed any kind of sexual assault on women. During the later Middle Ages in Venice, rape was neither uncommon nor considered a serious crime unless it involved children, the elderly, or a victim who was part of the aristocracy. As a result of rape, many women lost their social status and marriageability, while their attackers were written off as victims of youthful male sexuality. Occasionally, a man could take action against his wife's attacker for criminal diversion of his spouse. Thus, her rape was seen as an act against her husband as she was technically considered his property. Sexual assault against women has time and time again been brushed off and simply ignored by societies to the point where it has basically become commonplace. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for listening.